Hi parents, this screencast is designed to take the place of a meeting that we typically have in May for parents of newly identified gifted students. I am going to go pretty quickly through these slides simply because I only have 15 minutes of screencasting using the tool that I have. So please feel free to reach out to me with additional questions. This is definitely less time than I would typically spend going over this information. I wanted to start by just kind of giving you an overview of what does it mean to be gifted. The NAGC, or National Association of Gifted Children, defines giftedness as students in the top 5 to 10% of either aptitude, so sort of that IQ, or competence, so achievement in an academic area. So if you are listening to this, your child falls into one of those two categories based on testing that we did in February. The state of Ohio actually recognizes 7 different areas of giftedness. We test for each of them separately, and a student can be identified in more than one area. So the first is superior cognitive ability, which as is easiest to compare to an IQ. Although we do not use IQ testing, we use cognitive ability testing. We test for this in 2nd grade and then again in 4th grade. So more than likely, if your child is identified in this, they are a 2nd grader currently. And then likewise, I'm going to skip down. If a child has a superior cognitive ability index of a 111 or higher, we also screen them for creative thinking. And that's another area of giftedness. So that happens in 2nd and 4th grade also. Then we have all 4 subject areas: reading, math, science, and social studies. We test for reading and math in 1st and 5th grade. And we test for science and social studies in 6th grade because we start providing service for that in 7th grade. The last one we do by referral only. Visual performing arts can extend to anywhere from dance to drama to singing. We actually use the Montgomery County Educational Service Center to help us screen students for this, and they typically put together a portfolio of their work. So I like to go through some characteristics of gifted children and then some of the struggles that they may have as a result of those characteristics. This typically is really eye-opening for parents because it tends to be things that maybe are pretty common characteristics of gifted students, but when you see them at home, you don't really attribute those characteristics to giftedness. So academically, a couple of things that I want to highlight: excellent memory, large vocabulary, and then learns basic skills quickly and with little practice. This is one that we are really highly aware of because what research shows us is that a gifted child typically learns new material in 1 to 3 repetitions, where a typical student needs about 8 to 10 repetitions to learn that. And so we're going to talk a little bit later, but that rapid learning pace is definitely something that we need to be aware of and accommodate. In addition to academic characteristics, there are also definitely social and emotional characteristics we see of gifted students. So really highly sensitive and also feeling things quite deeply. Sometimes you see this as a reaction to something that you wouldn't think was a big deal, but they really, really do. And then also that keen sense of humor and putting things together in an unusual way, or a vivid imagination. Those are all pretty common characteristics of gifted students. So I mentioned that there are a lot of characteristics of gifted students, and sometimes there are some challenges that go along with those. So that acquires and retains information quickly. I mentioned that earlier. That can really result in some impatience, a dislike of routine and drill, resistance to mastering foundational skills. And we see this often, for example, students who are gifted in math who really resist doing basic math facts or writing down their work. And so this is something where we sort of, as a department, really try to act as a conduit between student and classroom teacher. So it's important that the student learn and know that they have to do some of those things, but it's also important for the teacher to be differentiating and making adjustments so that we can move students out of that sort of routine and drill and into more in-depth and challenging work. Um, the other one I kind of wanted to emphasize on this slide is down at the bottom, thinks critically, has high expectations, is self-critical, and evaluates others. So thinks critically is fabulous, but sometimes that really does result in perfectionism. Um, and we are going to talk about perfectionism a little bit more a little bit later, but certainly a characteristic of gifted students that can present quite a challenge for them. The couple that I really wanted to emphasize on this slide, that intense concentration, long attention span in areas of interest, that can result in resisting interruption and also seeming very stubborn. So not wanting to do anything except what I want to do and being really hyper focused on that. And that is one that is definitely frustrating as a parent, and then also can be frustrating for teachers, but it is definitely something that we have to sort of tap into those areas of interest and learn how to leverage that ability to concentrate versus resist it. The other two that I wanted to mention, high energy, alertness, eagerness, periods of intense effort. This can often sort of translate to this need for continual stimulation or almost feeling like hyperactive. It's a really fine line as to whether or not that is a characteristic of giftedness or that is something else. Sometimes I feel like we have gifted students who are misunderstood based on that characteristic, and really that is something that we see quite frequently. And again, it's really on us as educators to kind of harness that energy and get it moving in the right direction. And then finally, that strong sense of humor. We do sometimes see students who will become that class clown to sort of gain attention, and because they're naturally very funny and witty kids, and so sometimes that can create problems for them also. So I really rushed through this, and I feel badly doing so. Definitely take the time to read through these slides and let me know if you have any other questions. You can pause the video and read, and then continue once you've read through everything and noted any questions you might have. So I mentioned earlier perfectionism, and I said this is a really big focus for our department. So perfectionism can show up in a lot of different ways. It can be that traditional student who just puts hours and hours and hours into doing something until it's the very best they could possibly make it. It can also be the student who starts something and then has a complete meltdown because they can't make it perfect or they made a mistake. And then it can be the student who will not even start something if they don't think they can get it perfect. And this is a really big focus for our department because we see a lot of students who have this characteristic and then really struggle with it. It is one of the reasons why we test so early. So we test in first grade for math and reading, and then second grade for cognitive ability, which is a little sooner than most districts around us. Um, my philosophy is that the earlier a student is identified, the earlier we can begin to provide them with service, which means the earlier we can begin to provide them with work that is rigorous and challenging. And what we know from that is the earlier students have to engage in productive struggle, the less likely they are to really develop that perfectionism to the point where it is crippling to them. So if a student goes until fourth, fifth, sixth grade and they've never been given work that is difficult, and then all of a sudden they get something that's difficult, they often don't possess the skills to cope with that or know how to approach a problem like that. We really try to emphasize with our students a growth mindset. So this idea that your intelligence is not fixed. So you are not just the smart kid, that in fact everyone's intelligence is elastic and can grow and it can expand. And the best way to grow your intelligence and ability is to make mistakes. And we actually have students set yearly goals related to growth mindset. And we really ask that collectively we promote a growth mindset. So one way at home that you can help with this is that we have a lot of gifted students who get very focused on grades. They always want A's, and it's something that is can be very challenging for them if they get a grade that is not an A or 100 or whatever. And so we really try to emphasize to students that it is about the learning, not about the grade. And in fact, if they are in a class that is giving them the appropriate level of challenge and rigor, we would not expect them to always get a 100 or an A. So as much as you can just reinforce that at home, that will really help us to promote this idea of growth mindset at school. So let's talk about gifted service. What do we do for these students? So in second and third grade, I very carefully place students together in groups of about 5 to 7 in the general education classroom. So there is a second grade teacher, she has a homeroom, and I have worked with the principal to make sure that 5 to 7 students who are identified as gifted readers are all together in that room, or 5 to 7 students that are both gifted reading and math are in together in that room. That allows that regular classroom teacher to provide small group instruction to those students and adjust the work for them within her regular classroom. The regular classroom teacher is the provider of gifted service, but that teacher has regular access to a gifted intervention specialist and to myself to get work that will help to meet the needs of students. And those teachers also have training that they go to specifically to gifted education. Third grade is the same for reading. So in third grade reading, again, we make sure to cluster. Sometimes it ends up being a little bit more than 5 to 7 students, depending on the class. But we make sure that there is the ability of the teacher to provide small group instruction for our gifted students. Beyond that, students start seeing a gifted intervention specialist. So for students who are gifted in cognitive ability, creative thinking, and or math, they start going to a gifted STEM class once a day for 45 minutes. It is taught by a gifted intervention specialist. They go during their science time. It does cover science skills. It also covers math skills, problem solving skills, social emotional learning, all of the things that we know make up a well-rounded curriculum that would meet the needs of those gifted learners. The units that they do are project-based, and they do require collaboration. And that sometimes can be a struggle for some of our gifted learners, which is exactly why we require it, because we do believe that teaching students to work in groups is something that is a very important skill for them to learn, and also one that is not necessarily innate in those students. Our gifted readers in fourth grade start going to our green program. So that is grades 4 through 6. 45 minutes a week, students leave their reading class to meet with a gifted intervention specialist. And then throughout the rest of the week, they actually interact with that gifted intervention specialist through an online blended or remote learning way. The work that they're asked to do during the week for their gifted intervention specialist takes the place of work that they would typically do in the classroom. So the classroom teacher excuses them from some assignments so that they're able to have a differentiated curriculum that meets their needs. Sometimes parents ask me, well, can my child be in both? The answer is yes. We provide service based on your area of identification. So we have many students who are gifted in reading and gifted in math who have both of these services. The last thing I want to kind of address is just if you have a question or concern, how to go about handling that. Because there definitely are going to be times where you may have a question or you may have actually a concern about what's happening in the classroom. And I really often I get drawn into those situations, and I really want to give you just some advice because I've seen how it works best to handle them. So the first thing I would tell you is that your first contact should always be with a classroom teacher. Sometimes because I'm the first sort of face of a person who's told you that your child was gifted, people come to me, but I am not there in the day-to-day practice of that classroom. So it often, if you come to me, then I have to sort of play detective and go backward and try to figure out what happened. The classroom teachers all know all of the information that is in this slideshow. So it absolutely should be your first contact should be that classroom teacher. And if oftentimes there are questions or just a desire for students to be getting more challenging work, or a student has come home and said they were bored, which I will tell you, sometimes we do things that are boring, but they still may be very necessary or challenging. But if it is entirely possible that you may need to address your child needing more rigor or more challenge, and I would just absolutely recommend that you handle it, phrase it positively.